Hey folks, Tony Mo here, and today we're going to be talking more Warframe. I actually want to talk about a very specific piece of content today, a piece of content that dropped alongside or within the Heart of Deimos update. It's something I've really been enjoying, but it is definitely something that I have some feedback on, ways in which I think it could improve, and really just want to point out some of the areas in which I don't enjoy this particular piece of content. That content being isolation vaults. Isolation vaults are something you're going to be running a lot of if you have any interest in acquiring your own necromech. You'll need to run them to get broken parts. You'll need to run them to get resources to level up the Necroloid faction all the way to rank 3 to gain access to the blueprints, which you'll then use those broken parts with to actually build the pieces of your necromech and combine them together to have big old necromech, as well as necromech weapons if you decide to chase some of those down the line. So you run a lot of isolation vaults. This is a repeatable bounty. You can keep on running it. It comes in 3 tiers actually, which are unlocked within the bounty itself. This isn't something you're going to access in the bounty menu, and you're not going to choose like tier 1, tier 2, 3. You basically just run tier 1 and then decide if you want to go out to 2 other mother locations out in the open world of the Cambion Drift to go to a tier 2 and a tier 3. Should be noted that really the only difference between a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 is the number of necromechs you will face once you get inside of the vault. 1, 2, and 3 necromechs respectively with the tiers themselves. There's not a whole lot of difference between the 3 tiers. I think in general running tier 3 is more of a stamina thing for your group, especially depending on how efficient and effective your builds are. More than anything else, I don't think I've ever noticed like a really substantial ramp up in difficulty. I guess within the vaults themselves things can get a little bit more crazy, but in general the combat that takes place in the vaults while you're defending Lloyd as they go around and actually unlock the like essentially 4 nodes so you can solve the puzzle to the vault door, it's pretty chaotic regardless of what tier you're at. It's probably one of my favorite parts of an isolation vault run, but we'll get to more of that later. The thing I like about isolation vaults is that they feel like a good old-fashioned dungeon crawl, but the presentation, the sort of cinematic elements, I guess you could say, of these runs is top tier. It's not just like running a traditional tile set somewhere else in the star chart. You know, you've got really nice pacing as you flow into the dungeon across these different objectives, and then eventually you get to solve a little puzzle. It's got a nice bit of flavor, a nice bit of theme to it, if you will. It does enough to feel, again, like a proper dungeon crawl, and that's something I appreciate seeing DE still focus on as they continue to expand these open world segments like the Cambion Drift and Valis, and of course the Plains of Eidolon. It's something that I want to continue to see them mess with, because I think there's opportunities here for some really good, like, later game, more difficult content that, again, has a good theme, has a good presentation to it. So let's talk a little bit more about those isolation vaults today. Again, I'm picking on these because I really like them, and I just think there's a little room for improvement. And I think DE acknowledges this, considering they made changes to the isolation vault's difficulty literally the day after Heart of Deimos released. They basically said in the patch notes, the one segment, which we're going to talk a lot about today, the toxin segment, as you make your way into the caves, is too easy. We need to make it harder. I don't think they made it hard enough, but more on that in a second. Let's walk our way through an isolation vault run starting at the beginning. You'll head out into the open world of the Cambion Drift, and you'll be prompted by Lloyd and Otak to actually acquire some resources to make bait to feed to the monster door so you can get inside of the cave itself. This is going to have you chasing down Vohm or Phos residue. You take to a bait station, and then you've got a wave defense that occurs. You're going to deal with some infested, the bait is made, and you throw it into the monster door and climb on inside the caves. I think this is a really good opener. Small criticism, you know, the dialogue that repeats every single tier probably could go. It makes sense for the beginning of the mission. I hope DE gets to add more dialogue down the line, not just because it's kind of frustrating to hear the same dialogue over and over again, but because I actually really like Lloyd and Otak, and I'd love to hear more of their rambling. So this is a good introduction in my opinion. I think the general difficulty here, the amount of enemies you face off against is okay. It could probably be cranked up a little bit. I wouldn't mind having more mobs. I've always referred to Warframe as a horde shooter, and I think the game is at its best when you get to deal with hordes of mobs, even if they're lower tier trash mobs. We just want to actively be killing stuff because it's fun to do in Warframe. Now, as you make your way inside, we're going to get to the biggest point of contention for myself, and I think for all of the people that I've been running these isolation vaults with, this toxin defense segment, where you're essentially supposed to be keeping the toxin levels down so you don't melt away, is just not that fun. And I think the real issue here is just the general flow of enemies is way too low. Again, respawn seemingly increased. Wow, respawn. Can you tell I used to be a Titanfall YouTuber? DE increased the difficulty of this segment, but honestly, if you've got a group that's well coordinated and you're using relatively competent and powerful frames, this goes by very slowly, and there's going to be at least 2 people in your group pretty much every time who probably aren't killing much stuff because the other 2 people are just killing it before them. There's not enough enemy flow here, and I also think there's not enough risk. You know, this like toxin thing is supposed to potentially kill us. It's nearly impossible for the toxin to ever overwhelm you. Again, if you have a group that is coordinated, you might be able to fail if things really fall apart, but at the more, I guess you could say above average, I would say even average player level for this sort of content, there's just not enough happening. You know, the tension isn't there, and I would love to see DE further increase the difficulty here, especially as we move across the different tiers. It would be nice to see tier 3 maybe be a little bit harder. I understand they're not trying to lock out all this content and make it extremely challenging steel path level stuff so no one ever builds their necromechs, but a slight increase in difficulty in the flow of the enemies, the number of the enemies as you go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 would be nice. It's not noticeable if there is one. And again, I think there needs to be an additional factor here that increases the tension of this situation. It is the weakest link in isolation vaults. And when I was thinking about this, I started thinking about arbitrations. So arbitrations used to be this like one life, sort of mission type, right? You get some good reward out of it, decent endo, whatever. The problem was no one likes just dying in games. It's not fun. So the new system that they implemented is when you go down, you're out of the fight, and now your teammates have to scramble during all of this chaos, which, by the way, arbitrations are loaded with enemies. These are huge horde shooter moment right here. They've got to scramble to get these tokens and coordinate with one another to make sure one person has enough tokens to res that player. This is a really great moment of tension. I understand it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I love this sort of thing in Warframe, and I think in general when DE makes an attempt to do things like this to drive up the tension in a combat situation, they actually do it really well. Arbitrations are fantastic for this. I'd love to see a similar system with the toxin. Make it challenging enough where there is a risk of someone going down. And when someone does go down, the team has to maybe scramble to take out specific highlighted infested enemies to gain access to that ick that Otak talks about so they can apply it to their teammate to help restore their casing or whatever so they can get back in the battle and essentially not slip away into actual death. That's what this needs, in my opinion. Increasing enemy flow, great start. But I think to really take this up to 11 and have this be an exciting part of isolation runs, I need some tension, DE. I need some tension in my horde shooter. You do it well when you do it. Let us get some of it. Now, as we move past that, not a whole lot else to say here. I actually really like the vaults themselves. I like the little puzzle. The necromechs. It's fun bringing along a Wukong or somebody with an Octavia and just watching them reflect all of their damage back at themselves. I think the flow of enemies here, the number of enemies, the quantity of hordes you're going to face off inside the vaults is on point for the most part. It's a ton of fun. I can go crazy with my lens and my Protea here. I really enjoy being inside the vaults themselves. Obviously, from like a atmosphere perspective, they're stellar. This combination of infested and Orcan architecture is just killer. The only thing I'd like to see here is more variation. The vaults do change up in terms of layout. We've got some that are more vertical, some that are more horizontal. As we go from, Vohm to Foss, they kind of swap the tiles, if you will, the generation here. I just think more variation in how we escort Lloyd across the different nodes that he has to sort of power up or unlock so we can actually get to the vault puzzle itself. And I think the vault puzzle itself, this is kind of something that DE's done in the past. They always do these small little puzzle things, but it kind of feels like they're finally building up similar systems that players can actually recognize across one gameplay experience and the next. And if you've played any Railjack, the repair tool is the same repair tool you use in the intro sequence to Heart of Deimos. I like that. There's some continuity going on there. Why not let us use those repair tools for a specific part of this mission? Have somebody repairing a door or hacking or cutting through a door of some sort, doing something other than just solving this puzzle to gain access to that. Adding small bits of variation into these vault runs could really make them feel like cool, underground, you know, dungeon crawling heists, and I'm so fucking on board for that. It does seem like DE obviously plans to add more necromax, so I guess we're going to be running more isolation vaults, so more variation here could be absolutely fantastic. I just really like this piece of content, and I'd like to see it get better. So there's some of my thoughts on it. Variation, important. Again, that whole middle segment with the toxin levels, I think, is where things are at its weakest, though. Honestly, I'm still having fun running these things. I've ran over a dozen plus hours, probably well past that now, probably like 20 hours of these things. And I don't know, I enjoy it, dude. There's just something about the presentation, something about going down there with a group of friends and just mowing down hordes of infested, making your way into the vault, doing the little puzzle, and then watching all of that loot just pour out on the floor in front of you. It's just a good formula. I just think it has room for improvement. Everyone's going to feel different about this, of course, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you've been running a lot of the isolation vaults, what do you like about them? What do you dislike about them? Try to make the feedback actually constructive. I know that some people are very passionate, quote unquote, about Warframe, but when you just come here and you start rambling about how DE is the worst thing ever, I'm not reading your comment. It doesn't get anybody anywhere. It's not conversation I'm interested in. There's enough shit happening in the world. You know, let's just talk about the video game. Tell me what you like about it. Tell me what you dislike about it. That doesn't have to end with you name-calling developers. No one learns or benefits from that in any way. Now, let me give a huge shout out to my Patreons. Thank you all so much for supporting the work I do here on the channel. This has been a ton of fun to come back to YouTube, and you have all just made it that much more exciting, that much more enjoyable. I think that's the key word, that much more enjoyable. If you'd like to become a Patreon, you can click the link down in the pinned comment or the description below. Starting at just $1, you'll get access to early ad-free versions of my videos. You get access to our private Discord server, as well as my Patreon posts, where I'll regularly update you with behind-the-scenes looks at the videos I'm making, the content I'm producing, and even some of the side projects I work on, like Gunpla, miniature painting, and scale modeling. If that sounds awesome to you, maybe pop on over and see what's up. Other than that, I hope you all have a fantastic day. Be awesome to one another, and I'll see you all in the next one.